Hey folks, Dr. Andy C here from Pro Prep Coaching, back with another video, and this time on peak week. So let's get into this. So peak week, I think, is an absolutely fascinating topic. It's also probably one of the most controversial topics in the whole of bodybuilding. I love it. I think it's an absolutely great thing to talk about. Everyone's always got questions about this, so I thought I'd go ahead and I'd make this video on it. So, a few things before we get into this. Back in 2018, myself and my colleague, Dr. Trevor Simper, we wrote a paper on this, on peaking strategies employed by natural bodybuilding populations. So if you scroll through my highlights on my Instagram, go through there, you can find various papers that I've published down the years, but there's one on peaking, and if you click on one of them, it'll take you through the highlights of that particular paper, but you'll also be able to go and find the full text article as well by searching on there. And it's free to access for absolutely everyone, so anyone can have a look at it. And it's a 4,000 word article. It's got all the stats in it as well about what strategies people employ, what the frequency of these things are, what people do on peaking day. And then we've also talked about all the science of how peaking actually works physiologically, what's going on in terms of the biochemistry and things like that in there. So if you want all that detail and all that nuance, I would suggest going away, having a look at that article, because I'm not going to talk about all that sort of stuff in this particular video because it's just too dense. Okay, so first up, go and check that out. Secondly, this is such a controversial topic, and I think one of the reasons it's so controversial is because it's a bit different from regular dieting. It's a bit different from regular training as well. It's different from contest prep as well. So, I mean, with the best will in the world, so long as you create a calorie deficit, you have enough protein in your diet, you're going to lose weight and get in shape. It doesn't have to be much more sophisticated than that. You'll drop the pounds off sooner or later when you add the cardio in there. There's obviously nuance around what's the optimal strategy and what results in the most muscle mass at the end of it. But yeah, that's basically it. The same goes for training, I think, really as well. And again, I love training science. I think there's so many cool things in there. But so long as you really employ strategies of progressive overload, so trying to do another rep, trying to do an extra set, making sure that you don't burn out, you don't get injured, and you really work as hard as you can and develop the body across the whole musculature, then you're going to make progress in that respect as well, okay? And a lot of people can do that, okay? Where peaking gets a little bit more complicated, I think, and where a lot of people maybe go wrong with this is peaking is much more sophisticated than those two particular elements of the bodybuilding contest prep. It's even more complicated than making weight, for example, for say a boxing event or for something like a weight class sport where people just cut water and they jump in a sauna, because you have to be able to look good at the end of it as well. So it requires a much more sophisticated approach. It takes a little bit of math as well, because you have to do some sums to work things out. And my experience of working with people in university is people don't like math for a start. So they're a little bit scared of that. So it takes a much more sophisticated approach. You really have to understand a little bit about biology and sports nutrition to be able to effectively put together a peaking strategy. Otherwise, you're rationalizing for things can go wrong quite quickly if you don't understand these sort of the principles of how the body works. Now, what we do in the world of natural bodybuilding, or bodybuilding in general, is heavily influenced by the assisted world. So many of the strategies that we use for training and nutrition leak into or find their way into the strategies that people use in the natural bodybuilding world. And some of those strategies are great and they're going to work. Some of those strategies are not so good. And we know from natural bodybuilding that we're probably better off eating a higher carbohydrate diet, probably better dieting for a little bit longer period of time, because if we do things severely in terms of cutting calories then and cutting carbohydrates, we're likely to lose a bit more muscle mass, whereby drugs might be able to prevent that wastage down the line in the diet. The same is true for peaking strategies. So there generally is two sort of camps in this. People that will say peaking doesn't work, hands down. And the advice is just like, don't change anything. Doing all that sort of stuff is crazy, it affects your body. And then there's people in another camp that will say, well, peaking does work. Okay, so you've got this almost dichotomy, two extremes in the world of bodybuilding and the views around peaking strategies. Now, as I said before, what happens in the assisted world often leaks into the natural world as well. And I think one of the problems that we have around peaking is that we're not honest about the discussions that we're having. So when we look at guys who are in the assisted world, very often people will be using diuretics, and sure, that can help you get rid of the water from your body, but it can also leave you looking very, very flat, and that can affect the overall look. Moreover, many of the compounds, the drugs that people are taking in the assisted world cause people to hold water. They've got what we call long half-lives, so they'll stay in the system for a long period of time. So even though they might be stopped in terms of administering the drugs, the effects of these drugs might be lasting 2, 3, 4 weeks after they've ceased being taken. And because they're causing you to hold water, again, that can influence many of these peaking strategies and how successful they're likely to be. So you've got some of those variables that we have to contend with when we talk about peaking in terms of the assisted world. And I think that's again why there's so sort of hardline stances on this sort of approach from people who operate in that sort of world that find their way in, because the drugs change the variables. Now, in terms of our side of things, I would sort of posit that, look, people do peaking strategies, and people wouldn't do peaking strategies if there wasn't some merit behind them. I mean, they would have gone the way of the dodo. They would have been extinct like the dinosaur. People wouldn't employ these things if they didn't have some rationale for them being effective. It's just the nature of the beast in that respect. So if you can imagine yourself when you're maybe in your younger days, or maybe you're still in your younger days, when you would go on a night out with your friends, you'd have a little bit too much to drink, and then you wake up the next day and you look at your abs and you're like, Jesus, I'm so dry. Like, look at this development. You're maybe a little bit flat, but you look in the mirror, you're like, oh my God, like this is a great look. You're tight as anything. And that is a process of whereby you've used exercise, you're dancing and things like that, you've been doing alcohol, so macronutrients, to influence your overall look. So there's one example. Also, we've all been contest dieting. We've all done a contest of whereby we've eaten some junk food after the show, and then you wake up the next day and you look a lot better sometimes. I mean, it's a common story. The day after the show, the look you had was much better. You were fuller, your skin was tighter, all that salt, all that water, all that extra food filled you out, and you look much, much better. And then the third scenario I'm going to talk about here is we've all had days when we've been dieting and it's been a carb cycle or something like that we've been doing, and then, or we've had a hard leg session or maybe a little bit of rest over the weekend, and you've looked in the mirror and thought, wow, today I look really, really good. Other days, not so good. Okay, so those examples I'm giving you there are just examples of times whereby you've manipulated food, you've manipulated water, you've maybe had some alcohol, maybe had some salt, of whereby the look of your body has changed. The look of your body has changed. And when we talk about peaking strategies, that's all we're really talking about. We're saying, how can we manipulate water, macronutrients, electrolytes to change the physical appearance of the body for the better? And I think it's always disingenuous when people talk about peaking and they say, like, look, this doesn't work. I'm like, well, there's 3 examples where clearly this does work. What you're actually saying is either you've never managed to make it work, or you don't know how to make it work because you've never had the right advice. Secondly, or rather thirdly to that, if you're not in shape, and then this is cliche, we're going to see it all the time, peaking's not necessarily going to work for you. So there's this classic sort of idea that unless you're 100% in shape, then the manipulation of your body that you're going to do with these electrolytes, water, macronutrients, etc., is going to be largely ineffective. It's going to be a moot point unless you're 100%. If you're 10% off, then what's the point? So there's that to bear in mind as well. Now, peaking isn't going to be the same. I think that's a great point to make, depending on the individual you're working with, the class that individual is in. If it's a man, if it's a woman, how experienced that individual is, and what the psychology of that individual is. If someone's an extremely neurotic, so not that emotionally stable, they get stressed very easily, they get anxiety, there's judgment calls on the part of the coach to say, well, does it make sense to put this person through some sort of week-long strategy? Or is what we're going to do get them to drink a little bit more water for a few days, alongside maybe having a little bit more carbohydrate on a day show, and then we're going to cut out fibrous foods so they don't get any bloat? Because that, to me, that seems like a more sensible approach rather than a week-long strategy to get someone in shape. And what I've just mentioned there, that strategy that counts as peaking, okay? So we have to be clear on this. Any sort of deviation from your regular diet plan to try and enhance your physical look constitutes a peaking strategy, in the same way that a contest day strategy also counts as a peaking strategy. And again, I'll bring it back. I'll say, if you change your diet for the day of the show, you're peaking. If you're one of these people that say that peaking doesn't work, but you change things on the day of the show, then again, you're not being honest, because you're employing a peaking strategy right there. So that's all that preamble out of the way. And I'll say a few more things here. So what are the goals of peaking, right? So we want to do a few things. We obviously want to have a better appearance on stage. So what sort of things are going to be better? Well, we probably want to have a tighter waist. Yeah? Because we've got a tighter waist, we've got a better V-taper. So bloating, we need to stop that. We need to minimize that as much as we can. So fiber is probably not a good idea in this situation. A lot of heavy meals on contest day, anything that's going to give you gastrointestinal upset, is probably not a good idea. So eating 4,000 calories for breakfast on the day of the show, probably going to go wrong. Particularly what's going to happen to your guts, right? No one wants to be on the toilet for that period of time. We want to have the muscles as full as they possibly can be. So we want them to be large so they're popping. So to do that, we need to have full muscle bellies. So glycogen needs to be in there. Also, we want to have that kind of dry look. So that means that we have to manipulate probably electrolytes in some respect, and it means water. So we need to probably use a strategy whereby we drink a lot of water, so we get polyuria, so we excrete excess water out of our body so we can get that little bit of dryness. And then we maybe want to have a little bit of sodium to drive any excess water into the muscle cell itself, along with the carbohydrate we're going to have on the show day. The other element we have to contend with here is, you've still got a show to do, and that's an athletic pursuit. We're going to be on stage holding isometric poses for probably 10 minutes straight. It's a high energy burn there. So you're probably going to want to have a little bit of glycogen in the muscle, also something to reduce the stress of being on stage, or to at least reduce your effort perception. Something like caffeine can be very effective for that. I'm not talking about a crazy pre-workout, although people do stuff like that, but just a little bit of caffeine can make a difference in terms of your performance on the day of the show. So maybe a black coffee if you want, or maybe even something like a Pro Plus capsule. Okay, so it does come down to, though, what sort of look you want to have. If you don't want to have big full muscles, then maybe you're not going to want to be as big with carbohydrate loading, because maybe a slightly flatter look helps you show off your development a little bit better. It really does come down to the individual when we're approaching this. Okay, folks, I'm going to call it at that. So hopefully you found this video useful, informative. Check out the paper along my highlight at the top for all the nitty gritty on how peaking strategies work. And if you like this video, leave some comments down below. Check out the rest of our content and visit our website, www.proprepcoaching.com. Peace out.